if you're due for an upgrade from your wireless provider, you might want to consider these brands that are behind innovations like these. For years, Chinese smartphone makers have been flooding the markets of US, Europe, and Africa. Brands like Huawei and ZTE have been making their way into online retailers like Amazon, as well as with major US wireless providers like AT&T. With the smartphone market currently dominated by Apple and Samsung at a close second, the race for a third is heating up. For years, if you lived outside Southeast Asia, you would have never heard of brands like Oppo or Vivo. But with Vivo's latest advertising foray into the 2018 World Cup, and Oppo's phones being covered by high-profile YouTubers, Chinese smartphone brands are beginning to step out of their regional markets. So who exactly is in third place in the smartphone market? Who was able to hurt Apple's sales in China for 2 years in a row? Is it Vivo, Oppo, or OnePlus? Well, here's the thing. It's all three. You see, Vivo, Oppo, and OnePlus are all owned by the same company. For years, BBK Electronics has flown under the radar and stayed closely in its home market of China, where it has built itself up as a provider of low-cost iPhone clones. And it was started by this man, Duan Yongping. And like most entrepreneurs in China, he got his start in the private sector thanks to the Chinese economic reforms in the 1980s. And like the chairman of Wanda, that we talked about in the previous video, he took a struggling business, a company called Subor, and turned it into a commercial success. Duan had a knack for seeing opportunity in consumer electronics, and in 1995, when Subor had exceeded revenues of over 1 billion yuan, around $120 million at the time, Duan left Subor and created, and I apologize if I pronounce this wrong, Bubugao Communication Equipment Company, otherwise known as BBK. In its early years, BBK was happy making VCD, MP3, and DVD players, but when Nokia and Motorola entered the phone market in China in the early 2000s, well, Duan and BBK created their own line of phones to compete, which catapulted BBK into a commercial success in China, with Duan eventually retiring to the US to enjoy his fortune. But with the launch of the smartphone in the early 2000s, and the near collapse of BBK after his departure, he was forced out of retirement. And this crisis would change the landscape of the smartphone market in China in the years to come. Created in 2001, Oppo is one of BBK's oldest subsidiaries. And while they were happy making Blu-ray and music players in China, this man, Duan's protege, would eventually evolve it into one of the largest smartphone companies in China. In 2009, one of Duan's disciples, Shen Wei, would create the low-cost smartphone brand Vivo. By 2013, OnePlus, the youngest and the international spin-off of Oppo, would be born. But unlike Oppo, OnePlus developed premium smartphones with flagship features at a lower price. So while Apple and Samsung have spent over a decade establishing their brands across the world, BBK smartphone brands have steadily grown in Southeast Asia, eventually causing Apple's sales in China to take a hit in 2016 and 2017. You see, unlike Apple or Samsung, who rely on their brands to sell their products, Oppo and Vivo aggressively expand their market by partnering with retailers or setting up retail stores in as many locations as possible. So if you were living in the middle of nowhere China, in a very remote location, okay, not that remote, there's likely to be a Vivo or Oppo phone retailer near you. And if you happen to live in a large city in Southeast Asia, there would be 10 times as much retailers selling Vivo or Oppo phones as there would be selling iPhones. We're talking about blanket coverage of every major city, of every town and village, not just through advertising, but with actual retail stores and products. But it doesn't stop there. Vivo and Oppo incentivize retail sales staff with higher commissions when they sell their phones, something that Apple and Samsung are simply unable to match, locking them out from stores that aren't dedicated to their brands. And if you've ever been to Southeast Asia, that's almost every store. While Apple and Samsung have kept each other busy vying for global smart device dominance, Chinese conglomerates like BBK are starting to make their presence known globally. This is a company that started making low-priced iPhone clones that flooded the Asian markets, to being one of the leaders in developing notchless and bezel-less smartphones like the Vivo Nex and the Oppo Find X, as well as providing premium flagship features that's a few $100s less than Apple's or Samsung's flagships, like the OnePlus 6. On top of that, BBK's brands have been on a mass media blitz recently. Vivo, for instance, has been rumored to have spent about $500 million to be the official smartphone brand for the 2018 and the 2022 World Cup. They've also brought on NBA star Stephen Curry to endorse their brand, and if you look closely at Tony Stark's phone in Captain America Civil War, you'll notice he's using a Vivo. Oppo, on the other hand, has stayed relatively close to its regional markets, signing on celebrities all over Asia to endorse their brand, also becoming the official sponsor of the Indian cricket team in 2017. And they're also the official partner of fan-favorite Spanish football club, Barcelona. Okay, so now you're asking, what about OnePlus? Well, being a more premium brand, OnePlus has for the longest time steered clear from what its larger brothers have done and focused mostly on online sales and promotions. But recently, well, if this was a dinner party in Game of Thrones, Vivo brought a knight, Oppo brought an army, and OnePlus, well, they brought the king of Bollywood. For better or for worse, Chinese products will continue to flood the markets of Europe and the US, and at the current rate of Oppo and Vivo and OnePlus's growth, and each brand's mass media blitzes, I'm sure it won't be long until those brands become more mainstream in the US. And I'm hoping these companies can shake up the current state of the smartphone market, where we only see small incremental improvements year over year, while brands like Samsung and Apple continue to increase their prices.